Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who just has to admit it. I am not a very good Nick Cave fan. I sort of thought I was for a while, but it turns out I'm really not. I talked about this in my last video, where I talked about his previous album, Ghosteen, and I didn't really give it a proper review because I just didn't like it. I went over my history with it about how Nick Cave was my ex-wife's favorite musician, but I loved him before I met her, and I still love his music now. But I want to sort of spend a little bit more time with sort of the different modes of Nick Cave and the ways in which I am a bad fan who didn't really respect him as an artist. I sort of respected how he made me feel, but I didn't really respect him as an artist. So as I review this new album, Carnage, by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, an album which I appreciate a lot and I think is great, I think it's going to help me, and perhaps you, and as you watch my journey, understand more about what it is that makes Nick Cave so special, and also what makes Warren Ellis so special. So if we would actually go back, and I don't think I told this in my last story, but the way that I got into Nick Cave was the same way that I got into basically anything that wasn't just American pop culture. I just randomly, my brother rented the German movie Wings of Desire, a movie which I now think is a little bit goofy, but at the time when I saw it, I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. It's a German movie by Wim Wenders, and in the middle of this, it's a good movie, but it's definitely a little bit on the nose. In the middle of this movie, there's a scene where the lead actress walks into a club and there's this singer playing. And the singer plays these two songs. And he's like tall and like mysterious, and the songs are dark and they come from this really sort of dark, interesting place. And I just fell in love with whoever this musician was. I must have stayed around and waited for the credits and discovered that it was Nick Cave. And sort of from that time on, I just sort of always went to Nick Cave, but by being introduced to him through that way, I was introduced to him the way a lot of people are, which is as a sort of romantic figure, you know, a sort of junky poet god who, you know, is up on the stage and looks both handsome and ugly at the same time and has this outsider status wherever he is and is capable of writing about death and murder and, right? This feeling that he's able to give. And I don't think, truly appreciating his music enough while I was appreciating him as a character. I happen to have in my music collection this book about Nick Cave. And even this book, which is completely dedicated to Nick Cave, his music and his life, even if you just read the back cover, you see this weird reduction of Nick Cave as a character. Nick Cave, a living legend. In the early 80s, Nick Cave first achieved cult status with his band before going on to record songs, etc., etc. Like calling him just a cult figure and living legend. And I don't know, I think that this is a problem. I mean, it's a problem for his music because he is more than this. I remember a few years after that when the song Red Right Hand appeared in the movie Scream, and I got angry because I thought like, oh great, now he's going to be mainstreamed with all these people, because the usage of the song Red Right Hand was perfect. It wasn't a bad usage. Wes Craven knew exactly when to take the song and when to use it. The problem was my sense of ownership over this special cult figure was being compromised by its exposure to the masses. Of course, that's just ridiculous, right? I was just being a teenager, you know? I was thinking that I owned something that didn't belong to me. You know, but this sort of like whole realm of Nick Cave as this sort of dark, romantic figure. And I'm using the term romantic not in terms of kissy-kissy, but in like 19th century literature, you know, like a figure whose life is bigger than life, who lives in a world of giant stakes and great swings of emotion and darkness and pain and the search for truth. A search for truth which often comes out as affect. Him as being this great romantic figure, you know, like it makes sense that I was attracted to that, and it also makes sense that this is a really superficial way of appreciating him. So, you know, as I bought all of his music as soon as I got it. This is all that's left. After the divorce, we ended up splitting up our Nick Cave collection because we didn't know whose was what, which is a fair thing. So I'm left with Good Son, you know, and Murder Ballads, which was always my favorite. Is always my favorite because it was the most of that dark feeling. I got into a long argument with my ex-wife. I don't think either of us were right, where I was explaining that Nick Cave was a goth artist, and she got very upset because she loved Nick Cave and she didn't want to think of herself as goth, and goth is usually a term that's used to insult women. I don't know how that works out, but that's how it works out. But my argument was not like he's goth like, you know, like Robert Smith, but he's goth like in the terms of like a true 19th century gothic figure. And then, you know, probably our favorite album, probably my favorite album, Boatman's Call. I think we had 2 copies of this. But then this happened, and I just jumped off. No More Shall We Part, and then the follow-up Nocturama. This entered the phase of Nick Cave that I call the my nurse phase, where just on that album, he just constantly talks about his nurse, and his voice achieved a certain thin quality. And the thing is, I'm a bad Nick Cave fan, but I imagine, and if you're a big Nick Cave fan watching this, feel free to correct me, okay? I am putting myself at your feet saying, go ahead and correct me. So much of what drew me to Nick Cave was this, right? Not quite Tom Waits. I've never really liked Tom Waits, but it was that kind of growly, cool guy feeling that he could give me, that it seemed to be, as of No More Shall We Part, he was giving up for this kind of thin, my nurse, constantly singing about his nurse, just this really weak figure. And it seemed to me at the time that he'd abandoned this coolness. I should probably go back and revisit that album, because it's probably good now that I'm thinking about it. Over the years, every once in a while, there'd be something new that I would like, you know, Grinder Man, I remember liking that, and Dig Lazarus Dig, that was also good. And then Ghosteen came out last year, and that was the first album that came out since I've been paying a lot of attention to music. If you don't know, I stopped paying attention to music for around 18 years, from around 2000 to around 2018. So this channel is an attempt to fix that, and thereby attain eternal youth. And so, you know, I was excited to listen to Ghosteen, and happy to listen to it, but ultimately, it wasn't the my nurse that I didn't like. It's that it's too much about the death of his son. I have a son, I have a daughter. I can't be that close to death. For me, music is a life thing. Even when it's talking about death, it's a life thing. And like I love Warren Zevon, but I don't listen to his final album. It's too sad, you know? I love David Bowie. I don't really listen to Black Star. It's a little too close for me, you know? And it's not that those are both great albums, but I just can't get quite that close. So this was a new chance for me to appreciate Nick Cave, to get back, to try to be a better fan, because he's provided me hours and hours and hours and hours of great music. I think I was just scratching the surface of it. Now, I read a couple artist statements from them. What I think is interesting about this album is the most important thing to me is that it's not Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, right? That always implies a secondary nature to the Bad Seeds. This is Nick Cave, Warren Ellis. And Warren Ellis actually produced one of my favorite albums of last year, Tinariwen, sort of a interesting African album, which you should check out. I did a video on that there. But he very much, like Nick Cave is such a powerful living legend, right? Such a powerful voice that he definitely needs somebody who can counterweight him, who can be there and be an equal partner. I think he might have reached that stage in his artistry where he really needs that, or also just kind of go off into a sort of, I was going to say a solipsistic, but you know, a sort of self-indulgence that he could perhaps avoid. And I believe that's what you see on this album. I think you see wonderful Nick Cave story writing, anchored and tempered and altered and molded by Warren Ellis's great production sense and sort of avant-garde sensibilities. So Nick Cave refers to this as a brutal but very beautiful record nested in a communal catastrophe. He's always good with words. I do wonder if the title Carnage, I don't know, but listen, a little over 4 years ago, I remember watching Donald Trump's inauguration speech, and I was driving to my tailor. I was picking up a suit that I had made, or that was getting tailored, and I remember listening to it. And my tailor is a Ukrainian, a big Trump fan who's a Ukrainian. Kind of a weird thing there. So it's kind of this bummer of a thing, because, you know, I wasn't happy that Trump was nominated. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this speech, and it just keeps on using this word, carnage. American carnage, just over and over again. And it was like really bumming me out. Like I was like, this word is really upsetting to me. It's a really gross word. I don't know how that speech is known. I'm not a political scientist. But to me, it was the Carnage speech. that he was setting out his entire platform on Carnage, which is based on, carnal flesh, death of flesh, death of people. And I don't know, maybe that's mixed in with the sense of COVID and all this loss that we're having, this carnage that we're going through, or this massive death of people. Maybe it's the carnage of his own life. I don't know, but it definitely, when he's referring to this beautiful record nested in a communal catastrophe, I think you can read that in a lot of ways. I think a lot of ways it's political, but it's not like a boo Trump album. It's more like a boo the state of the world album. Kind of mixed in with some COVID thoughts there as well. Ellis, what I liked here is he said, making Carnage was an accelerated process of intense creativity. The 8 songs were there in one form or another within the first 2.5 days. And that's the feeling that you have. They did something really special, really quick. They did it quickly. I'm a language professor. But and it doesn't even seem like they overworked it either. It feels like a very immediate and raw album that is also somewhat polished. Lyrically, it's a lot like a lot of Nick Cave's albums, with sort of classical allusions and biblical allusions, lots of references to suns and moons and modern political feelings. But the whole time, Warren Ellis, I really think, is lifting this whole project up. They've done work in the last couple of years, work which I'm going to admit I have not heard. I'm a bad Nick Cave fan. Feel free to put it in the comments if you want. But they've been doing soundtrack projects together. And this album, I think, the reason that it's so good is that it feels like a spoken word album and a soundtrack album like had a baby, okay? So like the words are so important. They're so forefront. The singing, not so much. The words, much more. And then the soundtrack, like the music, the beats, the melodies really do feel like a kind of modern soundtrack song. And you kind of mix those together, and that's what you have with this really good album, which really lives on the strength of its lyrics. I mean, that's one of the main things. So this is the thing. I'm going to go through all 8 tracks. My favorite track is not the track I'm going to use to explain the album. I'll tell you why in a second. But the best example of this album is the opening track, Hand of God. I'm going to put a link to it up there. Feel free to go and listen to it and come back if you haven't heard it, okay? That's just how I do it. I call it my homework. So this is the perfect example of what this album is like. And I got creative with a way of describing this album, okay? So the album begins with Nick Cave playing piano and singing very Nick Cave lyrics. Somebody don't know who, somebody don't know when, looking for the heaven in the sky and God and people. And it's not bad, but it's almost like someone made a Nick Cave song generator, okay? With just someone singing about heaven and sky and God and people and with a voice and the piano. But then there's this sound that just comes in out of nowhere, like a flying fist from out of nowhere, knocking Nick Cave in the face and taking the whole song off the tracks. This is not the hand of God, this is the hand of Warren Ellis. And it just completely shifts the song. And I thought about, what does this make me feel? So I do a little bit of image manipulation. If you've ever seen my my thumbnails for my videos, you can tell I don't do it very well, but I do a little bit of image manipulation. And what I realized this was like, there's a smudge tool that you can use on any image manipulator, where you just take the image and you just kind of smudge it across. And this is what this does for me. It takes Nick Cave's songwriting, it takes Nick Cave's song, and just... So I'm going to show you what that actually looks like. I'm going to show you what this album looks like to me, okay? So we got Nick Cave, and he's singing, some people don't know who, some people don't know when. They look up into the heavens, and then... That's Nick Cave, right? You know that's Nick Cave, but there's something a little bit off. There's something a little bit unsettling, and it's not unsettling in the looking for a boy's butthole kind of way of unsettling. It's just slightly tweaked, slightly morphed. It's smudged. This album, and especially this song, is a beautifully smudged Nick Cave. I have to remember to save that for my thumbnail. Just great. It gets so weird. Eventually, the words hand of God," gets repeated over and over again, almost like a mantra, or like it could almost even be a techno song. At times, this feels very much like an electronica album, the way that it's layered, just lots of these layers, really, really like unsettling. And he keeps on talking about swimming out to the water where it's deep and just being comfortable. And he's not talking about drowning himself, but he is talking about drowning himself, I think. And he just seems to sort of be sitting there and allowing his Nick Cave-ish, these sort of like, very like personal, a little too close. Maybe step back a few feet from the microphone, Mr. Cave, if you would. You know, like this kind of closeness on here. And it's a journey. The whole thing, like a good soundtrack, a good song on a soundtrack is cool because it reminds you of the journey of the movie. Like you remember the part in the movie where it was, and they started at the person's house, but then they ended up at the general store asking questions. You know, whatever it is, like it's that passage, and you remember that passage. Most of the songs on here feel that way. Quick question: I'm not a soccer guy, a football guy, but wasn't there a guy named Maradona who was very famous for a football move called Hand of God? I don't know. Did he touch the ball with his hand? I don't know what it is, but I know enough about soccer to know that Maradona was a guy and that he did something called Hand of God and that he died in November. My prediction is that Nick Cave heard this in the news and decided to make a song based on that. I don't know. That's probably a stretch. So there's track one. There's my example for you for how to listen to this album. This denseness, this richness, this smudge. Old Time is kind of similar to the first track, kind of these upbeat, automated drums, very pulsing music here, very pulsing sounds underneath. It seems to be a song about following somebody into death. Wherever you are, darling, I'm not that far behind. But then there's another unsettling smudge wiping sounds and these low, what I thought were horns, but I now think probably are violins, given the fact that Warren Ellis is a good violin player. But it's this really distorted, super low, what sounds like a kind of guitar solo. And then Nick Cave plays that low piano note. Hey, pianos, here's a question for you. I'm about to go on a Jerry Seinfeld rant here. What's the deal with the lowest note on a piano? No one ever plays that note. Why is that even on there? It sounds so low and so stupid. Well, this is why there is that note, because Nick Cave hits that low note on the piano, that lowest note, and it has this power and this strength to it in the middle here. And it adds to the layer, right? It's not so much about it adds to the melody as much as it adds to this layering that Warren Ellis is doing. There is a reference here. If you're a big music fan and you love this album, you have been sitting here the whole time thinking, oh my God, Professor Skye is such a smarty pants. Do you see that back there? That's the album Hot Buttered Soul by Isaac Hayes. Probably the best album made in the 1970s, at least in terms of an entire album. Probably one of the most influential albums of all time. I didn't learn about it till like a couple years ago. If you didn't, do yourself a favor and go find it. But he references By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which is a song that's been played by many different people. And he says he hears it on the radio. So I'm thinking, well, what version is he hearing? But then a guitar solo comes in for a second and plays. And the way the guitar solo plays is the way that the guitar sounds on the Isaac Hayes album. This kind of famously distorted guitar solo sound. So I'm pretty sure this is a direct reference to Isaac Hayes, but I could be wrong. It's a nice kind of, I guess, intertextual call out. He's into intertext. Nick Cave is, you know. He talked about Flannery O'Connor. He talks about all this sort of stuff. He talks about Argentinian soccer players. He's Argentinian, right? Maradona? Okay. Then we come to Carnage, which this reminds me of the whole album a lot. I'm often reminded of Angelo Badalamenti, you know, the guy who did the soundtrack for Twin Peaks and many other things. That kind of soundtrack feeling. Kind of gross lyric. My uncle's at the chopping block turning chickens into fountains. Ew. But that kind of goes back to the old style Nick Cave, the ability to deliver a very unsettling line very beautifully. It keeps on talking about it's only love with a little bit of rain. It has that kind of thinness to the quality of his voice that I don't like, but then someone else comes and backs it up. And the song drags on a bit at the end. It's not my favorite song, but it leads into my favorite song on the album. The best song on the album, and I don't think it's even close, is the next track, White Elephant. This song deserves a lot of attention. Now, musically, it does a couple interesting things. It has this sort of almost like a bed, like a loop bed underneath, kind of like a kind of a slightly violent synthesizer, kind of going here, like the synthesizer comes in at a certain point and kind of attacks at a certain point. But the rest of the music, it's like, it's really just a bed for this words, like this idea of it being a spoken word album. And then at the end, it takes a complete left turn and becomes almost like some kind of weird quasi-gospel sounding song. And the whole thing is about the white elephant. So I'm going to do something I think I've never done. I'm going to read you all the lyrics, and I'm just going to talk through them. I haven't really prepared this. I copied the lyrics from Nick Cave's website, and I got them here, nickcave.com. And I think it's an amazing, I think this is the song that is the soundtrack of 2020. Now listen, some white guy from Australia writing the soundtrack for the Black Lives Matter protests and white supremacy in America seems unfair. It should be Run the Jewels, okay? Walk in the Cold Snow, whatever. Yeah, okay, that should be it, okay? I mean, truly, there's 1,000 other better songs written about the Black Lives Matter movement by African Americans. But poetically, cinematically, this is it. And I don't want to say that. I'm just saying this is an amazing description of it. Okay. The white hunter sits on his porch, his elephant gun in tears. So already the image of a white supremacist, this sort of fragile, belligerent figure who is at the center of this song. Okay, this song isn't about the African Americans or the people of color who are hurt. This is about the people who do the hurting. The white hunter sits on his porch with his elephant gun in tears. I don't know if this is a reference to Bungalow Bill by the Beatles. It might be. Who knows? He'll shoot you for free if you come around here. That you have a hunter on his porch. Okay, so he's a hunter on his porch getting ready to kill people. And meaning, of course, he's not a hunter. He's waiting for people to come by. I believe this is primarily based on remember those two people in like Missouri or something? Those two kind of like fat, rich, white, middle-aged people who had little tiny guns who are threatening peaceful protesters as they walk by. I see the song sung from their perspective. Get off of my lawn! And just in general, the far-right movement, and not even the far-right movement, a lot of people in America right now are basically saying, I wish a protester would come here so I could shoot them. Don't you just wish I'd carry it up on this plane? Like, they are so excited to get froggy, to just shoot a protester. They fantasize about using their guns on people who are protesting the death of people in police custody, okay? And I'm not exaggerating. I see this on Facebook, I see this on the internet, and here is Nick Cave describing it. He'll shoot you for free if you come around here. Here's where it gets most on the nose. A protester kneels on the neck of a statue. The statue says, I can't breathe. The protester says, now you know how it feels, and kicks it into the sea. So we now have a statue, presumably of Robert E. Lee or some Confederate general, being killed by the protester and thrown into the ocean. I can't breathe, now you know how I feel. You understand what that means. But this is where it gets interesting, because this statue being thrown into the sea has now become sort of reanimated. It's taken on a new power. Taken on a new power, which will be indicated in the next line. I am a Botticelli Venus with a penis, riding an enormous scalloped fan. Botticelli Venus with a penis. How may I help you? I'm going to start a record store. Botticelli penis with a Venus. It's a funny image. It's unsettling, but it's beautiful, and I think it's an accurate description. This idea of this sculpture, this piece of history, history being thrown into the ocean and then coming back with vengeance. That as these testaments to white supremacy in the South are being taken down, in the North and all over the world are being taken down, they're coming back. And they're coming back in this grotesque way that calls back to classical antiquity and life the way that it was before, back when things were good, back when the only beautiful women looked like Botticelli's Venus, right? This kind of classicism which can be confused with conservatism if it's done poorly. Going back there, and here we have Botticelli's Venus with a penis. A beautifully unsettling image, but this penis is important, of course, because this whole energy is often driven by this masculine need to maintain order and dominance and use historical precedents to justify that dominance. He is 8 lines into the song, and that's how far I've gotten. I am a sea foam woman rising from the spray. I am coming to do you harm, with the gun in my pants full of elephant tears and a seahorse on each arm. So now, like, this form of the elephant is interesting because if he is an elephant hunter, which is what he is in the beginning, and the song is called The White Elephant, he is both the hunter and the hunted, which I think is important. The image of this person standing on their porch just waiting to get froggy on a protester. And so the gun is filled with the tears, right? It's the grievance, right? It's white grievance that is, oh shit, was I supposed to do like a warning? Like a trigger warning or political warning? I don't care. Okay. Like it's the grievances that are loading the gun here, right? It's the grievances that load the gun of the people on the, those middle-aged fat people in Missouri holding onto their guns. They're filled with grievance and a fear of loss. And these are tears. These are elephant tears, right? It's this fear. With my elephant gun of tears, I'll shoot you all for free. If you even think about coming around here, I'll shoot you in the fucking face if you think of coming around here. This repetition is important. This repetition is necessary because it's showing the anger, right? It's not just crying, it's anger, it's rage. It's this rage, I will shoot you for free if you come around here. I am an ice sculpture melting in the sun. I don't know if I fully get this. This is just me reading it, by the way. I do teach poetry, but I teach French poetry. I do teach poetry, but I don't presume myself to have the definitive reading on this. I'm having fun with it, interacting with it, and frankly, taking the time that I think it needs, because these are some of the best lyrics written in the past year about our current situation. I am an ice sculptor melting in the sun. I think that's perhaps about the nature, the fragility that we're dealing with here. These people who feel under threat and like they are melting under the sun of the change in society. I'm an ice sculpture with an elephant gun, reminding you that the ice sculpture is still dangerous. I'm an ice sculpture made of elephant-sized tears, raining gas and salt upon your heads. The president has called in the feds. So now we're just talking about the Black Lives Matter protest. Right? I mean, we were sort of talking about that the whole time, but now we really are, because the president, who was present at the time during this protest, did call in the federal authorities. I've been planning this for years. I'll shoot you in the fucking face. It's beautiful. I've been planning this for years, indicating this is not actually based on this precise moment in history. It's based on this sense of the white elephants, like me, losing their power in society because we have had it too long, too easy, right? So I've been planning it for years. If you think of coming around here, I'll shoot you just for fun. I'm a statue lying on my side in the sun with the memory of an elephant. Okay? And that's the other bit. We're going back to Botticelli, we're going back to history, we're going back to these sculptures. The statue has this memory. The memory of when things were better, of when white supremacy was unchecked, or when white supremacy was accepted. Because what we're going through now is not actually confronting direct white supremacy. We're confronting the results of systemic white supremacy over hundreds of years, right? That's the moment that we're in. That's why it's so hard. That's why we keep fighting. That's why we actually probably should have some sympathy for people who can't fully grasp that, because it's a complicated concept, right? It's not easy to explain. Oh it's not about the KKK. It's about the fact that the KKK had power 100 years ago and the impact that has now, right? Like, it's understandable that's difficult to understand. But here we are, I'm a statue lying on my side in the sun. So this figure, this fat, white, suburbanite statue, Botticelli Venus with a penis, ice sculpture, is now on the side in the sun with the memory of an elephant evaporating before your eyes, becoming a great gray cloud of wrath, roaring my salt upon the earth. I suppose this is reference, I don't know, to Carthage and salting the fields to make sure you can't grow anything there. This idea of like a lack of fecundity, just salt on the earth. I will shoot you all for free if you so much as look for me. And then there's a break in the song, and it becomes like a weird gospel song with bells and like a choir. A time is coming, a time is nigh for the kingdom in the sky. This is where I do not pretend to know what Nick Cave is thinking at all. I just don't know. The rest of it, I think my interpretation is at least valid. It may not be accurate, but it's at least valid. Here, I can't even really hazard. Okay, there's either this whole end bit that's all about this religious feeling of there's going to be a heaven in the sky. This is either what the white hunter feels, the white elephant, right? The person on the suburbanite on their lawn with the gun. that they feel that they are waiting for heaven, or it's not. Or it's a song for the rest of us saying that things are going to be better and that these people don't actually represent society. I don't know what this split means. Why don't you tell me in the comments if you think you get what this split means? Because I think it either means one thing or the opposite. It is either satire of what these people believe, or it is a genuine thing of what Nick Cave believes, and that we should all be happy about the kingdom in the sky. What is happening in here, it's not always clear to me, but it's just beautiful. It's an amazing song. It's spiritual, and it is absolutely of our time, right? It is of our time. This is it. You know, why am I saying is it? I shouldn't be doing that. This is one of the songs that explains this moment. This is an outsider vision of what's happening. How about I say that? Not that this is the definitive song about the Black Lives Matter protests, because it's not. But I think it could be the definitive outsider take, okay? So somebody who was born in 1957, I think I read in that book yesterday, and grew up in Australia, okay? Someone completely outside of this whole situation. I think this is the definitive outsider take on this historical moment. Whew, I think I saved myself. Although I said that other thing like 15 minutes ago. Next track is called Albuquerque, kind of a necessary come down. The second best song of all time, named Albuquerque, after Neil Young's song. A song about things that he won't get to do. And this is very much an on-the-nose COVID song. Maybe this is intentional, that you have the Black Lives Matter and then the COVID song just to say, 2020! Okay, it's really where we are. Like literally saying, I'm not going to go to Albuquerque this year. I won't be doing much this year. Kind of sad COVID song that's good. Next track is Lavender Fields. Very odd. Again, these strange synthesizers, Warren Ellis. This actually reminds me a little bit of the soundtrack work of Georges Delerue, the guy who did a lot of the stuff for the French New Wave films. I don't know if that's just me. Is it possible that this is an intentional or a real influence, or if it's just me? I'm not quite sure. Again, though, this feeling of words over a soundtrack. The music is just a bed. He says, the first lines are, I am traveling appallingly alone. It's funny, my daughter is becoming a pretty good songwriter, or she's starting off her career, and she'll probably form into a good songwriter soon. And she's like, I don't know what to write. And I said, well, you can always do what the Smiths do, and when you don't know what to say, just use a really fancy word. and she did that, and it made her songs better. And this feels that way a little bit here too. Like, I'm traveling alone is a fine line, but I'm traveling appallingly alone. It's so strong. This is another song kind of based on one sort of metaphorical figure, and that's of the Lavender Field. This kind of reaches into the heaven. I think this might be about his son again, sort of this feeling of loss. I will say I planted a bunch of lavender in the front of my yard. Well, my wife helped me. I have a black thumb. But she planted all this lavender. It's the middle of the winter right now. It's like the beginning of March. And so this is what lavender looks like right now, just so you know. And this doesn't have to do with Nick Cave, but the question you might be asking yourself, does lavender doesn't look like lavender, but does it still smell like lavender? It does. So I'm just going to put that there in honor of Nick Cave's album, Lavender Field. There we go. The next track is called Shattered Ground, maybe my second favorite track on the album. Weird kind of eerie bell sounds, almost no music, like very little music, and him sort of in a Nick Cave way, talking about a naked woman with long hair. He comes back as a very romantic figure in the way he describes this sort of destructive love. It's a madness in you, a madness in me that makes some kind of sanity. That's definitely how I have felt in the past in relationships. Not good relationships that last, but in certain relationships, you're like, you're crazy and I'm crazy, and so we make sense. But then he kind of breaks down into a lot of sort of simple poetry. The moon is a girl with tears in her eyes, and then later the moon is a girl with sun in her eyes. Damn it, that's a really good lyric. The moon is a girl with the sun in her eyes. That's great. And she's this like figure that's running away from him the whole time. And then he does this really nice thing where he keeps on talking about like shattered ground and scattered all around. He almost has like a little like tap dancing with his voice. He creates all these interesting rhythms with these ound sounds. Scattered ound, scattered ground, slash ground. Like he's able to create this little pocket in this song of these resonances that it's almost like a single instance of just sort of vocal rhythmic interest. It's really good. The album ends with the track Balcony Man. I don't know what that means. I can't quite figure it out. It seems to be about like depicting himself and how he is, and 200 pounds of blood and flesh that spills on your favorite chair. I'm not really quite sure, but this is where I realized something. Remember at the beginning, you know, remember at the beginning how we had that piano that was going, you know, and it was just kind of a typical Nick Cave kind of sounding style song, and then the Warren Ellis smudge comes in. Well, really, this at the end here is kind of Command Zing. It's kind of like taking that thing and then going back to the standard Nick Cave mode of just piano and singing and kind of weird lyrics and nice kind of hopeful lyrics. The morning is amazing and so are you. I'm in the morning right now. The sense of it being an amazing morning is a beautiful feeling of hope and love, and that's the whole album ends on a sense of love and resolution and happiness for our Balcony Man. I don't know. I think that was an intentional decision to start the album off and then just and then come back with it at the end, a more typical Nick Cave sound. So there you go. There's the album. I'm very happy to have listened to it. I'm happy to try to be a better Nick Cave fan. You know, you have to trust the artists that are good, and you have to believe in them more than you believe in yourself, because that's how you follow artists. That's how you follow great artists who are able to change and take you along with them. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to start listening to this album some more. Maybe it's better than I thought. Maybe I can stop complaining about my nerves for 5 minutes. All right. Well, for Steve Cropper, there's the camera.